In the ancient city of Alba Longa, Romulus, along with his twin brother Remus and a band of Alban youths, participated in the wild rites of the Lupercalia. The twins already had a connection to wolves. They had been nursed, so the legend goes, by a wolf after being exposed as infants. As the young men carried out these ancient rites, a band of robbers attacked, and the altercation that followed resulted in Remus's capture, and eventually the restoration of the rightful King Numitor to the throne of Alba Longa, which would launch the destiny of the twins, who went on to found the city of Rome. 700 years later, Julius Caesar watched the Lupercalian foot races from his high vantage point on the rostrum. His ally Mark Antony had been selected as a Lupercus for the occasion, and he offered Caesar a crown. Caesar refused the gesture, but the optics were too much for an already restless Senate, and Caesar was murdered just a few short weeks later, an assassination which collapsed the Roman Republic. The festival in the background of both of these stories is the obscure Lupercalia, a mid-February celebration whose rites were debated even among Romans themselves. So where did this festival come from, and what gods did it honor? Why did naked young men smear themselves with blood and run through the street with strips of hide? What can we actually say about this ancient wolf festival? Hey friends, welcome and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Kate. This is Hearth of Hymonia, and we're here to discover and unpack the beliefs held by ancient Greek and Roman people, and sometimes their neighbors. We dig into everything, from mythology to magical practice, philosophy, and all those related subjects. If this kind of thing appeals to you, feel free to subscribe. And if you have any thoughts about today's topic, I invite you to share them in the comments. My comment section is very friendly, and many thanks for that. Okay, so the Lupercalia Festival. This is another request, so thank you for all of those. I'm still working my way through them. The Lupercalia Festival took place on the 15th of February. There are also some accounts that have the festival from the 13th to the 15th, and this is because the Temple of Faunus in the Tiber, on the Tiber Island, was dedicated on February 13th. We'll talk about how Faunus is connected to this festival in just a little while. Most often, it's just the one day, February 15th, but also the 13th through the 15th. Plutarch says that these are the inauspicious days in February, and he suggests that maybe the Lupercalia is some kind of purification ritual. So how it works with these inauspicious days is you're not supposed to do a lot of activity. They're supposed to be, as the name suggests, unlucky. But they're good for purifying, expiation, any sort of like spiritual housekeeping that you need to get done. So Plutarch's theory is that Lupercalia had this kind of purification element to it, and we'll talk more about that also. But first, where did this festival come from? The legend is that the rites were instated by a man called Evander, this kind of mytho-historical proto-Roman founder king guy who supposedly came from Arcadia in Greece. Arcadia had its own wolf festival called the Lycaea, so when Evander came to Italy, he brought those rites with him, and that became the Lupercalia, mixing with native customs here and there to create the holiday that the Romans celebrated. So that's the legendary founding of the festival. We really don't know too much about when the rituals actually began. The fact that there's a story of Romulus and Remus celebrating these makes it seem like they're very old. Even though Romulus and Remus are themselves figures of legend, they represent this kind of early, even proto-Roman time. So by writing them into this festival, I think the intention is to say that these rites are very, very old. So old that even we, the Romans, don't know when they started. Now, of course, other writers say that in part the Lupercalia commemorates Romulus and Remus, and that may have been true. Even if the festival had already been around, that element may have been introduced a little bit later on. We don't have any depictions of this festival from ancient art. The closest thing we have is it's on calendars, but that's not really a depiction of the festival. So we don't have any statues, paintings that show what the rites would have looked like. All we have are the written accounts, and there are many, most of them mentioning the Lupercalia or the Lupercalia in conjunction with something else. Ovid gives us a complete account in his Fasti, but otherwise, that's really all we have to go on. And in terms of archaeological evidence, there's two problems here. The first is that this festival, as we'll see when we talk about the rites, wouldn't be the kind of thing that would leave a lot of archaeological evidence. And then second of all, Rome has been continuously occupied, so we are lucky to have the archaeology from there that we do have, but I'm sure that there are buildings that have been in continuous use at least since the Middle Ages with really cool stuff buried underneath them. So for multiple reasons, we don't have anything to go on other than the writers themselves. And the writers, as I said, they don't really even know where this festival originated. They are doing their best to piece it together, just like we are today. What we can say is that the rites of the Lupercalia are so close to the rites of the Lycaea that comes from Arcadia, that's the one that Evander is supposed to have brought over, that they must be related somehow. When people came from Greece and settled in southern Italy and made their way north from there and traded with Etruscans and other groups in the area, that must have been when the festival was introduced. And then the last thing I'll say by way of kind of introduction is that the term Lupercalia is obviously related to the word for wolf, lupus, in Latin. So what gods were involved in this Lupercalia festival? I have to take you on a little bit of a journey here. The Greek festival, the Lycaea, was originally dedicated to this wolf deity called Lycaeus. But eventually, Lycaeus kind of falls out of fashion. He's not really worshipped that much anymore. And his name gets attached to other better-known Olympians, and non-Olympians, but other better-known gods like Zeus. So you get Zeus Lycaeus, Apollo Lycaeus, and importantly for us, Pan Lycaeus. And each of these gods, as they are taking on this epithet Lycaeus, they're taking on this kind of wolf quality in one way or another. So in Zeus's case, for example, there's a famous myth about Zeus having a very contentious relationship with a man called Lycaon, who he turns into a wolf as punishment for various things. And so Zeus Lycaeus is not a wolf deity, but really a kind of like an anti-wolf deity. So you get this shift from the festival is dedicated to wolves and, wolf-like qualities to really being about keeping wolves at bay. And we see this also with Pan. So Pan is this nature god who is in charge of a lot of stuff, but one of the things that he's in charge of is he's a protector of the flocks. And when he absorbs the term Lycaeus as an epithet, you get Pan Lycaeus, the protector of flocks against attacks from wolves, which was this is a reality. This festival kind of takes on a new meaning as it progresses. And by the way, Pan was worshipped in Arcadia, so there's another connection to the festival. The next stage in this journey that I'm taking you on is that the god Pan becomes associated with another god, Faunus. who really had his own thing going on, but eventually the two become equated, and as things progress, especially in, say, the Hellenistic period, Hellenistic Alexandria, writers are using the terms Pan and Faunus interchangeably to refer to the same god. So by the time you get to Ovid, he says that the god of the Lupercalia is Faunus. You know, his temple was dedicated on the 13th of February, so you have the Lupercalia on the 15th, or the 13th through the 15th to bring in that commemoration of his temple's founding. In the city of Rome, the rites were held in this cave called the Lupercal Cave, and you can see the name Lupercalia and, again, lupus in there as well, which is located in the area of the Palatine Hill. This cave, just by its name, you can tell is associated with wolves. It's sacred to wolf deities, and might be sacred to the wolf who nursed Romulus and Remus. This is said to be the spot where it happened. And it's a cave. Caves are the dens of wild beasts, right? They're dark, earthy, almost chthonic places. Not for nothing, a lot of entrances to the underworld are in caves. I'm not suggesting that the Lupercalia is an underworld festival, but it's interesting that it takes place in a cave. Caves are these kind of places set apart from the rest of human society. They are very natural, earthy, wild. So the rites took place in the Lupercal Cave, and the young men who were selected to participate in the rites were called Luperci. These would have been young men, Plutarch says, of noble birth that were selected to perform these rites. Now, originally, they would have done these rites totally naked, but over time, you know, that custom kind of changes as Rome becomes more polished and cosmopolitan, whatever you want to say. But originally they would have been totally naked, and Ovid actually talks about this, and he tells us why that might be. He says that the god Faunus, if you'll remember Faunus, was accustomed to being naked and, like, you know, when he was going around. So he wants his priests to be like him. You could think of, say, the Vestal virgins are virgins because Vesta is a virgin, for example. Priests are kind of, at least in one way or another, embodying some kind of quality of the god that they are cultivating. And then Ovid also says that the ancient Arcadians, and ancient by his day, the ancient Arcadians used to go around naked as well because they lived closer to nature and they were much cooler than us. So he gives us those two reasons why the Luperci were naked. The Luperci would gather in the Lupercal Cave and perform these rites. So what kind of rites were there? And fair warning, this is going to get a little gory, so if you're squeamish, tread with caution. So the first thing that happens is a sacrifice, and there are two sacrificial animals, a goat and, disturbingly to our modern tastes, a dog. But the goat is the more important one for the rest of the rites, so as I'm going through and talking about the animal, you know, for the rest of the time, I'm referring to the goat. So the goat would be sacrificed, and then the Luperci would take the knife that was used to sacrifice the animal and would smear the blood on their foreheads. And then after that, the blood is wiped off with wool that has been dipped in milk. After the smearing of the blood and wiping it away, the next thing that would happen is a symbolic tasting of the entrails of the animal. And there's kind of a couple of things going on with this. So first of all, if any of you are familiar with like hunting culture, and this is, I'm also not speaking from personal experience, but from what I understand, when you kill an animal and you eat whatever it is, the heart or the brain, or I've even seen in some cases the eyes, you kind of embody the characteristics of that animal and like maybe even take on some of its vitality, some of its life. This is not a kind of like immortality ritual or anything, but really an absorption of the essence of the life that has just been given. So that's operating in the background. And then the other thing that's operating in the background is something specific to Roman sacrifice, and Greek as well. So when a god received a sacrifice, the way that it was done was the animal was slaughtered. If there was divination happening with the liver or something, that would happen. And then the entrails, the bones, the fat, sometimes you'll see this translated like from Homer as like the inward parts of the animal were burned on the fire in most cases, and the smoke that would rise up would be the offering to the god. In cases with like chthonic deities, it works a little differently, the mechanism, but the idea is the same, that the gods want the parts of the animal that are not the meat. They want the bones, they want the fat, they want the organs, and so that's what was given. And then the rest of the animal was for the people participating in the festival, and this is a great way to get your population fed. Normally, people didn't eat those parts that were dedicated to the gods. In this case, the Luperci are eating those. There's kind of this like esoteric journey that we have to go on here. As they're taking on the parts that are meant for the god, they're kind of imitating the god and like trying to participate in this sacred mystery of the god, and in a way almost striving after that god. But this is no good because this is hubris. And so there is a kind of taboo against competing with the gods or saying that you're better than the gods or equal to the gods, claiming divinity when you have none. As the Luperci are doing this, they're committing a taboo act on purpose, knowingly. And then immediately after that, they run away and they're chased by other people. So in a way, they have committed a sin, for lack of a better term, and now there is the immediate consequence for that. They're being chased out. And this goes a long way towards explaining some weird stories we have. I'm thinking of Greek examples where people would cross some kind of a boundary, a symbolic boundary, maybe a body of water or something, leave their clothing behind, and run away into the wild somewhere where they would live in a period of exile, having been transformed into wolves. So I touched on this briefly. I did an old video about werewolf stories, so if you want like the sources for that, go and see that video. There's all these stories of people turning into wolves and running away and like living out a period of exile, and then returning to humanity and rejoining society. So I think that's definitely connected to this Lupercalia ritual, where you are committing some kind of taboo, some kind of sin, embodying wolf-like qualities, running away, and then after that, I mean, they didn't run away for good, right? This is just a festival. They would come back, at which time the sacrificial animal had been cooked, and then everyone would share a meal together of the meat. I mentioned before that Plutarch suggests maybe this festival had some kind of purification or expiation type element to it, and I think that this is where that might come in. So over time, this running away gets replaced with a foot race. Things become watered down, things become quote-unquote civilized, and so instead of being totally naked and eating organs and running away, you have lightly clothed, maybe still tasting the organs, it's unclear, and then participating in a well-organized foot race. But in both cases, this was followed by a feast where the actual meat of the animal would be consumed by the people. Now, later, over time, another ritual gets added where the skin of the goat is cut into strips, and as the young men are running around, they are hitting people with the strips of goat skin. Interestingly enough, young women who were trying to conceive would allow themselves to be hit with the goat skin because it was said to promote fertility. Now, what this has to do with anything related to the Lupercalia is beyond me. This feels really out of place, but I think that this ritual is the one that captures the imagination, and that's where you get things like Lupercalia, the gruesome origins of Valentine's Day, that kind of sentiment where there's a fertility element, so that must be connected to Valentine's Day. I don't think that's the case at all, but so if you've read anything about the Lupercalia, you may have seen that Pope Gelasius outlawed the festival in 495 CE. This is not exactly the case. The Pope didn't have the power, really, in fact, to outlaw anything. He had the power to influence politicians, to influence the emperor and other elected officials, but he couldn't actually outlaw this festival himself. What we have from Gelasius is a very angry letter complaining about the Lupercalia and all of its wildness and nakedness and gore and how it's so uncivilized. What this does say is that the Lupercalia festival was still being celebrated some 500 years after people were like, yeah, this is a really old festival and we don't know where it comes from. I mean, if we are to believe that it did originate in this sort of proto-Roman period, one way or another, then we're looking at a span of over 1,000 years that this festival took place. That's pretty remarkable. So whether or not Gelasius actually really truly wiped out the festival just by denouncing it and forbidding Christians from participating, or if he was just a strong critic of the festival and yet it perpetuated, slowly declining over time from that point, we don't really know. So there is no sort of end to the Lupercalia festival that we can point to. So if you are someone who observes Roman holidays and you're looking for ideas on how to celebrate this festival, I want to give you a couple of suggestions. First of all, I'm going to link a video in the description from the Stitching Witch. They give some good suggestions about substitutions for different aspects of the festival, and the most brilliant thing that they come up with, in my opinion, is that instead of sacrificing an animal, you could donate to a wolf sanctuary. I just think that's such a great idea. I never would have thought of that. So I'll link that video down below, and I'll add some of my own suggestions here. In my mind, the primary function of the Lupercalia is this kind of spiritual cleansing. I think this is more of an internal kind of a thing. So rather than observing it by cleansing your house, for example, you could do some more spiritual cleansing, personal cleansing, that kind of stuff. And honestly, you could just go into nature for a while, take a walk in the woods. Or there is the fertility aspect, so if you're trying to conceive or if you're trying to bring forth some kind of creation into the world, be it a project or what have you, you could focus on that aspect as well. And then lastly, if you really want to celebrate the festival in Roman fashion, find an Indian restaurant or a Jamaican restaurant, get yourself a goat curry. Now, obviously, that's not going to work for everybody, but you can really take this festival and make it your own. I think that's true of all Roman festivals. So if you are celebrating, or if you have celebrated in the past, I'd love to know what you're doing or what you have done. Let me know in the comments. So the Lupercalia festival is this really old, really obscure celebration that even the Romans didn't quite understand. The Romans whose writing we have, they didn't quite understand it. And yet it lasted potentially for over 1,000 years. So clearly there was something to it that drew people in, that kept people doing the rites and setting the festival up. It must have been something very special. That's all I have for you today. So thank you again for the request, and thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, you can let me know by leaving a thumbs up down below. And as always, jump into the comment section. I'd love to know how you celebrate Lupercalia, if you celebrate Lupercalia, or your thoughts about anything that we talked about today. And if you're interested in Roman religion or belief in general in ancient Rome and ancient Greece, I'd encourage you to subscribe to the channel because I talk about this stuff all the time. I'm always posting videos about miscellaneous things in the belief of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. So that's it. Thank you again for watching. I truly appreciate you, and I'll see you next time.